Samaj, Sarkar, Bazar, right? Governments, business, society. And the most interesting work usually happens at the intersection of these. The key principle is neutrality. You're trying to care for development, and development is a 4 or 5 lane highway. It's not overlapping.
Today we have with us Mr. Kartik Desai, who is a partner at KOIS International. Mr. Kartik has been more than 15 years of experience across management consulting, impact investment, and private equity. He has previously led Asha Impact as an executive director and Lok Capital along with Avishkar Frontier Fund as vice president, developing deep expertise in innovative finance and impact investing. Mr. Kartik has built a track record of raising and deploying private capital across high-quality social enterprises in sectors including financial inclusion, health, education, affordable housing, and energy access, with multiple successful exits and industry awards. He has served thrice as a board member of the Impact Investors Council and co-chair of its Ecosystem Committee on Blended Finance. He holds a master's degree in International Affairs, International Finance and Business from Columbia University. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
It's wonderful to be here. It's a real pleasure.
Before we begin, it will be great to understand your background and how you got interested and then transitioned into the space of developing finance.
So I have been working in the development finance space pretty much for most of my career. I'm 40 years old. I started my career in 2004. I was born in India, but at the age of 10, I moved to the United States. Briefly living in Geneva for a short period of time because my father was an Indian government official and then he joined the UN. So I grew up actually you could say in a development household, and my mom was a social activist and a sociologist. So, and then my own intellectual interests were both in economics. I did an undergrad degree in finance and also in political science and in social science more broadly, in history, in understanding different cultures, in understanding how humans relate to each other beyond just economics. So that took me to Columbia. And to be honest, that was the best part of my educational journey. Then 9/11 actually happened in 2001 when I was studying. That also got me interested in learning about issues of globalization and so on. So that's how my journey started, Isha. I actually moved back to India in 2005 when I was only 25. So I gave up my green card, I gave up all of my jobs and everything in the US, happily so, to come and work in India. I worked for about 3 years in the financial services sector, specifically in investment banking. The Indian capital markets were booming at that time. From 2005 to 2008, the markets went through an enormous period of growth, particularly in India. And of course, that ended with a financial crisis. So during that time, I worked on some very interesting IPOs, some M&A transactions, and I got to see how corporate India, how the finance world functions. And then basically since 2007, I got into what is called impact investing, which I basically saw as a combination of finance and development, basically applying finance for development, but that's a very broad space. And within that, you have multiple segments. So since 2007 to now, like almost 15 years later, this whole space of people wanting to figure out of how they can contribute to society while still sustaining themselves and doing so in a sustainable way, if not even a profitable way, has gained a lot of currency, right? From educational institutes to media channels and so forth. But there's a lot of buzzwords now. So people talk about ESG, they talk about impact, they talk about sustainability, they talk about blended finance, they talk about CSR. And that's great, but it's very important to understand like what these things are. And that's what I'm really fascinated by. And I've been very fortunate, I've been blessed and lucky to have a very good career, because I took all these risks, but it's paid off for me because I love what I do. I've had the chance, as you said, to work with 2 social VC funds, which were considered pioneers in India. One is, of course, Lok Capital, founded by Mr. Rajiv Lal. It's basically the first fund that invested in financial inclusion in India, in microfinance companies. Microfinance is probably one of the best examples of social business, which both generates, money and creates impact for low-income people. So I did Lok for about 2-3 years. Then I was with Avishkar. Avishkar is, of course, India's largest impact fund house. They have multiple funds. I helped them set up and manage something called Avishkar Frontier Fund, which is basically the first time that an Indian fund manager was investing in countries like Pakistan, like Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. So that was my job, to go to those countries and build the impact investing market over there. Very interesting experience. And then, of course, I must obviously highlight the time, at Asha Impact. I was hired by a gentleman, Mr. Vikram Gandhi, who's a well-known business leader, and a fantastic human being, to basically set up this platform for himself, Mr. Pramod Bhasin, and other Indian business leaders to directly invest in social enterprises. It's interesting, right? You guys talk a lot about CSR. One of the biggest gaps in our country is the lack of domestic or Indian money in development. 90% of our venture capital funding comes from abroad. A lot of development funding comes from abroad. So that's not good, because India is actually a middle income country with a lot of wealth. So how do you take money of wealthy Indians and apply it toward development in a meaningful way? That's basically what Asha Impact did. So part of that was doing investments. And then the other part of that was doing policy advocacy, basically working with government, working with foundations to try and figure out, what are the best development models, and including working with CSR and trying to figure out what are the other types of capital other than pure commercial capital, and how do you use the right type of capital for the right type of development. And then finally, very recently, in fact, I have joined KOIS as partner in charge of their business for Asia. KOIS, just briefly to talk about them, is essentially a combination of an asset management platform and an advisory platform, based both in Europe and working in Africa, and based out of India, all over Asia, and soon in other parts of the world like Latin America as well. So it's a global platform. We manage both venture capital funds, impact funds, multiple such funds. So for example, in India, KOIS manages two funds. One is known as the Tara Fund, which is a joint venture between KOIS and ILFS. Of course, now that's completely under KOIS. And the other is something called Health Quad, which is again a JV fund managed by KOIS and Quadria, a global private equity fund manager. So these are the two funds that KOIS manages in India. In Europe, they also manage other impact funds. And then there's the advisory business, which is really the bit that I'm sort of working on, which is working with foundations, working with corporates, working with governments to create what we call blended finance solutions, which is frankly at the heart of development. Working on large scale development projects in areas like, let's say, mental health, dignity of labor, the Himalayan underserved ecosystem, menstrual health, anything which is really, really high impact. And this can be in Europe, child protection in Europe, working with construction laborers in India, right? Mental health in villages and communities in India, or in other countries. Health, of course, corresponds. We're working on maternal and menstrual health in countries like Ethiopia, in other countries in Africa, and potentially in places like Bangladesh. So this is a pretty wide scope, as you can imagine, but it's something that I love doing, and I feel very blessed to be doing it. So happy to be here and chat with you and answer any questions you may have about.
So since you have been associated with the field of impact investment for a very long time, and you do carry a rich expertise and experience in this, how would you describe the emergence of impact investment and innovative financial solution in India, and what potential do they carry to bring change at scale?
I think, look, the emergence of impact investing in social finance in India is a very exciting phenomenon. I'll make a couple of comments about it. Number one is something that I've heard my boss Vikram say and others say, that India is the laboratory, right? That's a good thing and a bad thing. Every single problem on the planet exists here. Poverty, prejudice, pollution. You look at economic issues, social issues, political issues, we have every single problem in the world. But India is also the place where arguably, to put it bombastically, every single solution also exists. India has the largest number of not-for-profits, the largest number of startups. Many of them are social impact-focused startups. It's got a vibrant civil society, it's a democracy, it's got wealth, it's got culture, right? Like, I'm a complete Indophile. So it's got all the problems, it's got all the solutions. It's the global laboratory for social impact because of our diversity, because of so many factors. So many things that get developed in India, particularly the entrepreneurial capacity, the education system, the fact that so many smart Indians like yourself are working on these issues, those lessons are global. And similarly, India is an open society. So technically we can learn lessons from Africa, from Bangladesh, and not just other developing countries, all countries, Japan, US, Europe. So India is a lab, number one. Number two, on a capital markets or finance basis, also India is pretty advanced. India has some of the most advanced capital markets in the world, right? Particularly equity markets. That's an important distinction. Second only to some OECD countries. Literally, like it's ahead of most European nations, other than let's say the UK and the US in many respects. However, on debt markets, that's not necessarily the case. But nevertheless, there's a lot of free-flowing capital in India. We have negative aspects of that, from crony capitalism to over-regulation to ease of doing business being difficult. That's one of the biggest problems for startups and all to thrive. But overall, it's a pretty thriving capital enabling ecosystem. More startup funding is raised in India than I think any other country other than big countries like the US, UK, Israel, and others. So, so all of this is like to the good. And given that we have so many development challenges and such a vibrant, I'm just going to turn the air conditioner off, such a vibrant development ecosystem, social finance has always been around in India. You've got well-established social sector leaders across the board, from well-known names, Mr. Bankar Roy in Rajasthan, Neelam Shibber at industry. There's so many. I mean, we can literally continue and list them. Organizations like Pratham, organizations like Jan Sahas in the area of migrants. So many, right? Mrs. Vandana Shiva, work that's been done. So India has got no shortage of amazing social sector models and leaders. And it's got no shortage of capitalists, people who are good at making money. So it's almost like marrying these two ideological spectrums together. And then of course there's the government. So Rohini, Mrs. Nilekani talks about Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar, right? Governments, business, society. And the most interesting work usually happens at the intersection of these, because often they reject each other. The government will say, look, we don't trust the private sector, they're too greedy. Private sector will say, well, we don't like the government, they're too bureaucratic. But not everyone in the private sector is greedy. Not everyone in the government is bad. So if a good private sector and a good government person come together, then you get the benefit of both. And that's really what, to be honest, blended finance and all of this is all about. And India is rife for that. So that's the opportunity and that's the challenge. So India is the hub of social entrepreneurship. It's so much activities happening here. It's the hub of capital flows of all kinds, including private capital flows. So it's the right place for all of this stuff to happen. There are specific issues in India, regulatory issues, legal issues. We can lay out the litany of complaints. I'm not going to do that here. It's more about solving those issues. And solving those issues is about finding the answers at the intersections of the Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar, rather than just complaining that, oh, Bazaar is bad or government is bad. The truth is you need both, and you need civil society. So this is why it's all about finding these solutions. And there's lots of interesting, exciting solutions which are out there and which people are working on. Happy to talk about some of those, and one can go sector by sector or model by model. There's solutions in the private sector, there's solutions in the social sector, there's solutions in the public sector. So there's a lot of good work happening there. And I think, that's what we need to all do and educate each other on and share experiences to figure out what are the initiatives worth supporting, what's the best use of our capital.
Thank you for sharing that, sir. And definitely, as you have mentioned, we need to develop trust and leverage each other's expertise and we should tap on the intersection of the Samaj, Sarkar and Bazaar to bring sustainable change at scale. All right, sir. So zooming out a little, I have recently come across bamboo regenerative pay for success instrument that you have developed. And as we know that India is the second largest cultivator of bamboo, but the bamboo sector is very fragmented and unorganized. So even though the demand for bamboo in the domestic and international markets are good, but the small scale businesses struggle a lot in India to showcase the scalability with an end-to-end focus on the entire value chain, from the farmers to the producers to the retailers. So how does this instrument, that is bamboo regenerative pay for success, envisage to bring sustainable cultivation practices and an improved rural livelihood?
Thank you for asking that question, and I'm so glad that that this is people are talking about this. So what you're referring to is the Regenerative Agriculture Social Impact Bond that KOIS is currently helping to build out for a wonderful NGO called Industry, INDUSTREE, which works with rural artisans on handicrafts in different value chains, most notably up till now banana bark, and now they're proposing to do this with bamboo. So here's what we're trying to do. The idea is to grow bamboo in a large scale in a commercially viable and environmentally sustainable manner, which actually has not really been done in India in such a way, despite a long history of the National Bamboo Mission and a lot of efforts being made on bamboo. There's many reasons for that. Partly they're scientific, the varieties of bamboo that grow. You can have a low value use of bamboo, like making a basket or even a small incense stick, or it can even be used for construction to replace wood, which has a much higher use. You have large corporations like IKEA, which we all know well, who has recently entered India, who are very interested, who are very ethical, sustainably focused companies who want to actually source this bamboo, not just from other Asian countries, but also from India. So this, what we're calling the Regen PFS, Pay for Success instrument, is a $10 million impact bond to help with 10,000 farmers, or to be more precise, roughly 7,500 farmers and 2,500 artisans. So they grow the bamboo. It's a 4-year cycle. You grow it in the right way, planting the culms so that they don't impinge upon other crops. There has to be the right amount of water and so on and so forth. But it's a very self-sustaining regenerative crop, as the name implies. So by year 4, year 5, it starts to yield the bamboo, which then the artisans convert into products, which are quality certified, done in a very, in a value chain where you can measure the impact and the exact price that the farmer is getting and the value addition that comes from the artisans. And companies like IKEA actually will source this at scale. So industry works with, let's say, these 10,000 beneficiaries, both the farmers and the artisans. The bamboo is planted, the bamboo is grown. Companies like IKEA buy it. And here's how the financing construct works. So this will also help you understand the concept of an impact bond. So now to do this, it takes $10 million of capital. Someone has to put 70 crores, roughly, I'm giving round numbers, okay? 70 crores of investment to, let's say, do X thousand hectares of bamboo farming, okay? But the outcome is also defined. That what is the outcome? In 4 years, this much bamboo will get produced. This much bamboo will get sold to the open market as products to IKEA. There's an economic value for that, right? The social impact is the carbon sequestration. There's maths on that. 40% extra carbon can be sequestered by bamboo. There's economic livelihood impact, that this many smallholder farmers and artisans will get economic livelihoods. There's a gender impact, that the vast majority of these artisans and even farmers are women. So that's how the impact is measured. You measure the carbon sequestration, you measure the income increase, you measure the gender impact. And outcome funders are willing to pay for that impact. So they're saying that, look, if in the end of 5 years, this much bamboo is successfully produced and sold, this much environmental benefit, then I will pay back that 10 million. So that's the outcome funder who pays in the future back to the risk capital. So the risk capital can be a private investor like you or me, or any HNI. So we can fund industry to do this work with our own money, knowing that if industry does a good job at the end of the project, we will get our money back. And who do we get it back from? Different types of outcome funders. And who are these outcome funders? I'll tell you. An outcome funder can be the government. So for example, GOI has a program with the National Skill Development Corporation, NSDC, for skilling. So for this $10 million of outcome funding, X million, let's say 2 million, can come from the government. Another outcome funder is IKEA. IKEA basically says that, yes, if this is successful, I will pay, let's say, up to 2 million. So IKEA becomes an outcome funder. You have Indian foundations who are interested in supporting regenerative agriculture, like let's say Tata Trust or other foundations. They come on board. The other stakeholder is the beneficiaries themselves. So out of the surplus that's generated, the farmers themselves are able to pay back, let's say, 20%. So 2 million out of 10 comes from the farmers. And the final 2 million, let's say, comes from CSR, from different corporations. So you're able to get all these different kinds of money, 20% from farmers, 20% from CSR, 20% from a global corporation, 20% from an Indian foundation, and 20% from the Indian government, and collectively create an outcome fund that says anyone who successfully grows bamboo in this way, and you prove the outcome metrics, I will pay you back your investment for doing this. So that is somewhat longish explanation, but hopefully giving you a clear and accurate sense of what this very interesting thing is. And it would be only India's 4th or 5th such impact bond. There haven't been that many. There's been one in education, or rather 2 in education. There's been 1 in skilling. My former employers, Asha Impact, are designing India's first social impact bond in healthcare in Pimpri Chinchwad near Pune. And this would be the very first one in rural livelihoods. And similarly, KOIS is currently working on several such projects. They've done, or we, as an organization, we have done over 50 such bonds globally in countries like Europe, in sustainable land use, in the topics that I mentioned, mental health. There's about to be a very big bond that's being announced in refugees in the Middle East. And in India, we're working on a variety of projects as well. In addition to this regenerative agriculture one, two other big projects we're working on. One is in dignity of labor, which is working with construction workers to help them get paid on time. I can talk about that. And the other one which we're working on is in mental health, which is how do you actually provide mental health in villages. We're all familiar in the urban context for people like you and me. There's apps, there's counselors, etc. But what about in the villages? So there are NGOs who have figured out community mental health response and working with large pharmaceutical companies to support those. So this is a little bit of a background on the types of impact bonds that KOIS is doing overall, and most importantly, the one that you asked about.
Thanks for providing such conceptual clarity to our learners about what an impact bond actually is and how it works, along with laying out all the details of the initiative and the impact bond that you have developed or you are planning to develop in the future. So thanks a lot for that. And as you have been mentioning that mental health is one of the areas that you have been working. So on that note, I would like to ask that the prevalence of mental health disorders in India are increasing, and it has been further amplified due to COVID-19 pandemic. And especially in the cases where there is no trained mental health professionals, mostly in the rural areas, it becomes very complex to address and manage the mental health disorders. And to overcome this, you have developed a mental health development impact bond as a promising solution to help scale up existing community-based mental health care models in rural India. Could you explain this model in detail, along with sharing some of its challenges that you might have faced?
No, absolutely. No, thank you for that. And it's absolutely spot on how you described it, right? Which is that the mental health prevalence in India has only gone up. India, anyways, is known to have a large mental health burden, and it's somewhat taboo subject globally, even more so in India. So it's been suppressed. We have regulatory issues, right, with how you certify counselors and what that even means. So there's a whole host of issues, and clearly post-COVID, the issue at least has gained greater awareness and traction. So in the startup space, for example, you see multiple very interesting startups. In my own personal life, for example, during COVID, I set up an NGO called the Happiness Collective to help bring people together in urban India on a common platform, to talk about some of these mental health issues. And there's fantastic NGOs out there, startups out there working on this. But most of those are focused on urban, educated, digitally savvy people like you and me. The vast majority of Indians live who don't have access to that. They live in rural India or peri-urban India. And look, here's the key point. Mental health is intrinsically linked to poverty for many of these people. There's a trigger there. Poverty drives people into depression, as is completely understandable, particularly dire poverty. And the issues are also related to gender and patriarchy and behavioral issues. We have the caste system in our country. Women are kept at home. There's domestic violence, there's alcoholism. These young people have joblessness, they can feel depression. So you can imagine a host of these issues happening in any village. Sometimes these issues, going beyond anxiety, depression, and so forth, can be clinical. So there's different degrees of issues, right? Some issues require hardcore medical treatment and referrals. So this is the state of affairs, and it's a big problem. So the initiative is again, it's a development impact bond. In this case, with a large global pharmaceutical company actually providing the risk capital to fund this initiative. There's an NGO in India called CMHPL, Center for Mental Health Law and Policy. It's actually a quasi-government institution. They've worked a lot on mental health legislation also, and a lot of the regulation around the mental health policy of India. This is a topic that incidentally is slowly but surely coming on the agenda of the government of India. And I'm very hopeful that at the central level, the government will take this up. It's an absolutely critical issue. And I know the health ministry is actually evaluating it right now. And already a lot of good policies have happened. And the reason I mention that is because mental health really needs to be looked at in what these guys say, as a rights-based approach. It's a basic human right, like access to medicine or like access to any other kind of healthcare. So this is all the context. So what this NGO does is they've developed a community-based model of healthcare delivery, mental health delivery in rural areas. They basically use volunteers. So they'll go into a rural community. They're doing this work right now in Mehsana district in Gujarat. a population of 1 million people. So almost 80% of that population, or 8 lakh people, are put through what are called awareness building activities. So these could be films, media, content that you show them, which make them aware of various issues. Number one, that helps you identify which are the families and which are the individuals who need the support and the counseling, correct? Then there's a series of one-on-one counseling that's done, but by people from that village, trained by trainers from this NGO through this initiative, which is called Atmita. So there's a methodology that they've developed, and these are very basic conversations. So someone comes to your house, and let's say, and I'll give you a small example. So if you even use the word mental health, people say, I don't know, I'm not sick. But if you use the word tension, many people say, I'm feeling tension. So you measure the tension in the village. Except tension ज़्यादा है, बेटी की शादी हो रही है, बेटा गांव में काम करने से, खेत में काम करने से मना कर रहा है, उसको जॉब के लिए जाना है, right? So everyone has tension. So then they go through these counseling sessions and they get taught these practices and they feel better. The third pillar is referrals. So the ones who have really serious mental health and medical issues get referred to medical experts and so on. And finally, the poverty element. All of these families get access to entitlements. You help them register for Aadhaar, for different government schemes. They get money in their accounts, often for healthcare schemes. So this is what this NGO does. And they've basically shown that for X number of dollars, they can deliver amazing outcomes. And look, this is a well-known NGO, Center for Mental Health Law and Policy. Their work has been featured by the Lancet, the medical journal abroad, which talks about validating that this actually works. Recently, they were featured on the WHO list of the 20 best medical innovations. So again, KOIS has been working with a large pharmaceutical company to create a development impact bond to finance the scale up of the work of this NGO from one district to multiple other districts. And if those outcomes are met and you're able to demonstrate that, yes, indeed, the mental health situation is improved in these districts, then the outcome funders pay back the risk capital. That's the construct, at least, in a development impact bond, where you're focusing on outcomes versus a traditional grant, where the NGO is just given the money and it's there's no accountability. Here, the NGO is forced to deliver the outcome. There's a laser-like focus on improving outcomes. So this is a little bit about that project.
Right. And you have correctly mentioned that we think that people who are living in the urban setups are the only ones who struggle with mental health and who suffers with these disorders. And we assume that rural people do not have mental health problems. And because of our own biases, maybe we tend to have this approach and we ignore their challenges and their disorders. So it's an incredible step in that direction that you have taken. And that brings me to our last question for our interview today. So since you have been tapping on different domains in the development sector, be it menstrual health, mental health, and healthcare, etc. So how did you foster convergence and build partnerships, develop collaborations between government, for-profit organizations, donors, investors, social players, etc. to unlock the social impact? Could you shed some light on that?
And I love the focus and the clarity of the thought process here, and the articulation. It's a difficult question to answer. So absolutely. So if I can understand the question and paraphrase it, you're saying, how do we create collaboration, right? First is recognizing the criticality of it. And the first point that I mentioned of removing biases and ideologies. Too many of us are just biased people culturally, subconsciously. We don't even realize it. We work in the private sector and we disrespect people who work in the government. We work in the government and we think all private sector people. So if you have that bias, how are you ever going to work together? So the first thing is to remove that. Second is a unwavering focus on integrity and ethics. One of the reasons for the mistrust is because of lack of ethics on both sides, both in public sector and private sector. So there has to be absolutely zero tolerance for that. And that doesn't just reflect on financial corruption, but ethical normative behaviors, how you treat other people. So many organizations, for example, will speak a big game about impact, but if you look at how they treat their own employees, those practices don't reflect that. So that's the kind of starting point, that first you realize the value of that. If you really want to do something meaningful in life, you're going to have to be multidisciplinary, and you can't just emphasize that, I'm an engineer or I'm a writer. You have to learn the other skill to find that convergence, and you have to realize the importance of what they call values-based leadership, and having absolutely zero tolerance for what we see in both business culture and political culture. And therefore that helps you identify and come together with a group of like-minded people who also value collaboration and who are also, good people to work with. So once you have that pool, and India has many such people doing that, then I suppose the next step is expertise. Many of us have good intentions, so we may not have the capacity. So you really have to have depth in those sectors, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's agriculture, or those themes. Sometimes it's not sectors, like women's empowerment is a theme that cuts across sectors. Climate is a theme that cuts across many sectors. So you can choose, you can become a deep expert in one particular sector, you could pick a theme and sort of, but either ways, you have to build a team, build an organization which has that expertise in development, again, without that non-ideological bias. Some people feel that only startups can solve it, and NGOs, they're biased against them. Some people are biased the other way. They feel, I only want to work with NGOs, I don't think startups can do it. So the key principle is neutrality. You're trying to care for development, and development is a 4 or 5 lane highway. It's not overlapping. The government is actually the biggest impact investor. Their budget of $400, $500 billion a year is the largest impact budget. Then comes philanthropy. Philanthropy is pretty large. Then comes maybe impact investing, which is $1 or $2 billion a year. And then comes maybe corporate CSR. Corporate CSR is actually bigger than impact investing. So all of these guys are trying to do the same thing, no? They're all trying to, let's say, support educational outcomes in Bihar. So then you figure out at the lowest spectrum where the biggest subsidy is needed, in let's say the most poorest district, no private investor can make a return there. So that work should be done by government, right? I believe, what I've learned in my political science classes is that the fundamental job of a government is to take care of the weakest citizen. In fact, that's how you judge the integrity of a country, is how do they look at the absolute, that's Gandhiji's talisman. So, right, that's the job of the government. Then above that, there are people who are, let's say, lower poor or middle poor. The NGO sector should look after them because, there the models can be maybe just somewhat sustainable. Above that, you have impact investing, ideally, which is looking at, let's say, lower middle or middle class segments, not upper rich segments, because there's all kinds of banks and venture capital firms already funding those startups. So we have to start to look at it as a stack and not as either or. So these are some of the principles. So I think once you start to look at it that way, and you need to get expertise in all the different areas. So if you're going to work with governments, if you're going to work on policy, you need regulatory expertise. That's tricky. You need to hire people who come from a policy and regulatory background. For the business and investing side, you need to hire people who come from a business and investing background. That's precisely what we did at Asha when I was running it, which is we had an investments fund, or an investments virtual fund rather, where we had people with commercial backgrounds, and we had a trust where we had people with backgrounds, much more multifaceted kind of people with backgrounds in all kinds of things, not just policy, right? So that's the core of it, a focus on this interdisciplinary generalist thought process while still having the robustness to go deep and look at sectors, and generally being open, being collaborative, and having values-based leadership. I think that those are the key elements, I would say. I know this is a little bit generic, but it's a difficult question to answer. But hopefully if these elements are there, then at least I've seen in my life that some pretty incredible collaboration is possible.
Yeah, and along with the blind spots and biases that you have said, there is also a lot of trust deficit that exists, and there's this feeling of competition. So we keep building a lot of different parallel solutions that leads us to nowhere in the longer run. So it's high time that we should come together and leverage the expertise of all the players in the entire ecosystem and build sustainable solutions, and that then only we'll be able to reach to the last mile of the society. So thank you so much for sharing that.
That's the biggest one. That's the biggest issue. So I think it's happening, I think, and so many organizations, this collaboration, it's really a joy to see that. When you see people from government, people from the private sector, people from CSR, people from abroad, people from India, all coming together. I've been, a member of the Industry Association, IIC, pretty much since its foundation. 3 terms I've served there. I recently stepped off the board there, but it's just been incredible to see it go from pretty much nothing when I first joined the industry in, 2007 to now, where it's like everyone is talking about it, and it's like but that's just impact investing. That needs to now happen for blended finance. Blended finance is like the future of impact investing. Impact investing is great, but it's understood, and it's kind of 50-60% part of just regular investing. and private sector investing. So people get it. And a lot of private capital is coming in and more will come in. It's sort of established. But real development is not still happening. And to do that, these issues have to be addressed. So right now you have impact investing on one side and you have philanthropy on the other side. And everything in between just like falls, is like where the real action is happening. And that to me is the future. So the same attention, the same, intention, capacity, thought process, all effort that all of us applied towards impact investing in the last 10, 15 years is what I believe as an industry, as development professionals, we need to now genuinely do towards blended finance. And if we do that, then we're going to be able to solve some of these development challenges, because there is also now a much deeper sense of frustration. There really is, with the greater interconnection, right? You see that. So it's not just, I said, India is a lab, everything is moving ahead in the right direction. There's also big strategic risks. So I do believe that if we don't do this and find solutions to bring capitalism to really help the poor, just look at the way the inequality is going up. And things like COVID make that even more stark. For the last year, all of us have been sitting at home, so conscious of the fact of the inequality that exists. And we're literally seeing a V-shaped recovery. People like myself and others who are fortunate, to be in a certain position in their career, who are fortunate to have thinking-based jobs that we can do through a laptop and video conferencing, our careers can take off. But people who are working, who don't get to work, on their laptops, but have to work on the ground because they run a shop, or they're driving, or they're a farmer. 90% of people have jobs like that, right? Or they're cutting someone's hair. They're out of a job. So it just behooves us to really think about this, not just as some development kind of sideshow, but as really thinking about how do we bring all of this kind of thinking into mainstream business and even mainstream public thinking, to be honest. Retail investment, not just high finance. And that's the hope for blended finance. Everyone does have the capacity to make impact. I've totally realized that. The philanthropist who's giving $1 billion away is not creating more impact than you if you're able to help the 3 people who work in your house. And I don't mean by just giving them a little bit of money. And people say, I've put my staff's child through education. That means nothing. See where they're sleeping. Have you given them a bedroom? Would you be willing to sleep in the same bedroom as them? Only if you can say yes to that, then you're taking care of them.
Definitely.
Right? If you give them a used laptop, but your child has a brand new Apple laptop, right? So you have to push people's standards. It's not okay for them to just think that a little bit of philanthropy, a little bit of charity is okay. People have to fundamentally question their assumptions. And when you do that and you see that happening, there's wonderful initiatives. One more initiative I want to quickly mention here is Living My Promise, right? You guys must talk to them. This is a network of people who have signed up to give away 50% of their wealth through their life. And they're not all wealthy people. In fact, most of the ones who are doing most of the interesting work are young people like you, young professionals who don't even earn that high of a salary, who basically still give away 50% of their salary and their time. So I think we must question that notion that not everyone can make an impact. I think we must educate people about what does making an impact mean, right? And enable them to be strong from within. Because if you are strong yourself and capable yourself, then you can take care of other people. So entrepreneurship is basically about that. You create jobs, you create success. Building teams is basically about that. That's my primary focus in any job that I've been in. It's not my investors. It's not even my clients, to be honest. It's the team. Because if you do the right thing with the team, they're the ones who work with the startups, who work with the clients, right? And then if they do a good job with the clients, the investors will be happy. So no, this has really been a wonderful chat. I know we went a little bit over, but I think your questions have triggered some good thoughts, and I really appreciate the opportunity to also talk a little bit about KOIS and some of the new things that we're doing. As you can tell, I'm very excited about it, by the potential of it, and I hope that folks like yourself and others who are listening to this will also really give this a serious thought. That ESG and impact investing we all know about. But check out blended finance. That is really the wave of the future. If you're a talented person, that's where you're needed. It's hard, but it's worth it.
And that brings our interview to a close. Thank you so much for sharing such wonderful insights with us. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and all the best for all your future endeavors. Thank you so much for joining us today.
What a pleasure. Thank you.